Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to IPI. My name is Jenna Russo. I am the Director of Research here at IPI and also the head of IPI's Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations. Today, we are here for a policy forum on UN peacekeeping and CPAS, examining progress and lessons learned. We'd like to thank our partners for today's event, in particular the permanent mission of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the UN. IPI's research and publication on CPAS is part of a larger work stream on A4P+, which has been funded by the Kingdom of the Netherlands and is meant to provide a critical set of research and support to key issues confronting UN peacekeeping. We'd also like to thank the UN Department of Peace Operations for partnering with us today on the Policy Forum. We appreciate that DPO's Division for Policy, Evaluation, and Training was open to IPI taking an independent look at their work and for their constructive partnership throughout the research process. Today's discussion will allow us to take a deeper dive on CPAS, the Comprehensive Planning and Performance Assessment System. CPAS started as a pilot project in MINUSCA in August 2018 and has now been rolled out in all 12 missions. CPAS intersects with many of the UN peacekeeping's A4P+ priorities, and it has helped missions rethink the ways that they evaluate their substantive performance and improve their operations. We're also using today's discussion to launch IPI's report, UN Peacekeeping and CPAS, an experiment in performance assessment and mission planning, written by my colleague here, Daniel Forti. The report is accessible on IPI's website, and we also have hard copies by the door out on the stand, and we encourage you to pick up a copy if you have not done so already. DPO has also published their own internal stock-taking report on CPAS, which can also be found in hard copy by the door in the lobby. We think today's event will provide for a rich discussion and exchange of ideas. Before I turn to our excellent panel, please let me invite two of our partners to make some opening remarks. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. Jehoon Oostervaar, Deputy Head of the Political Section at the Permanent Mission of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the UN.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for this introduction, and it is really a true pleasure and honor to be able to help open this event. I'm joining IPI and DPO in welcoming everyone for this very important discussion today. It is focusing on an important undertaking, we believe, in developing a tool for performance evaluation and assessment. IPI is helping in that process we are all engaged in, namely in helping improving UN peacekeeping as a practice and improving the future of the future prospects of UN peacekeeping as well. We highly appreciate our partnership, our cooperation with UN Secretariat, with UN DPO. We highly appreciate our partnership with IPI as well. Obviously, DPO is right there at the very forefront of everything that has to do with UN peacekeeping. And IPI, as most of you will know, is a critical partner, an important partner of both member states, as well as the UN when it comes to important themes such as the one we're discussing today. IPI provides in-depth analysis, research that is driven by knowledge and data from the field and by excellent analytical capacity. So we need partners like IPI in order for us to be more effective jointly. And let me emphasize one thing that is really for us at the very top of our mind when it comes to exercise like this. And that is that knowledge is really power. The more we know, the more we are able to operationalize the ideas that we have and the expectations we have for UN peacekeeping when it comes to delivering concrete results. We can put certain concepts and ideas that are reflected in mandates better in action. and we can enable the UN peacekeeping missions to produce tangible results and ultimately to contribute better to sustainable peace. And it is also, of course, an important part of the larger undertaking of Action for Peacekeeping and the Action for Peacekeeping agenda that was launched several years ago by United Nations Secretary General, and we are pleased that we have been able to be actively involved and support the Secretary General in this endeavor during our membership in the Security Council in 2018. And we aim to support this process very much as a facilitating player, as an actor that supports the UN Secretariat and all of the other stakeholders. Having been closely involved in the launch of the Action for Peacekeeping agenda, we will strive to contribute in the coming time, and we've done so far as well. And including by focusing on this partnership with IPI and exercises and important processes such as developing CPAS. In addition, let me also mention that work such as this closely aligns with the Netherlands' ambition and pursuit of what we call the integrated agenda of peace, security, and development, and where the different pillars of UN peacekeeping are looked upon critically through a mechanism such as CPAS. We believe that the three key components of civilian, military, and police can come much better together, but also they can collaborate and work much better with other stakeholders. And finally, decision-making that is based on sound analysis of performance of UN peacekeeping will also contribute to better progress on SDGs, and in particular the SDG 16, peace, justice, and stable institutions. CPAS has already produced clear results, and we will hear more about that today. And we believe that continued work should be welcomed, and we encourage collaborations between actors already involved, the existing donors and supporters of this exercise, and also future donors. Without further ado, let me once more thank the organizers, IPI, and also in particular a special thanks to the author of the study that we'll be discussing today, Daniel Forti. I wish you a very fruitful and productive discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jehoon, and we really do appreciate the continued support of the Netherlands to IPI. Next, I'd like to welcome David Harry, Director of the Division of Policy, Evaluation, and Training at DPO.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Daniel, and the whole IPI team for this really high-quality research on the CPAS system. As you know, the CPAS is a priority for our Undersecretary General, Jean-Pierre Lacroix. It fits under our overall framework for improving peacekeeping, so-called A4P+ framework, in particular because we believe, and I think we'll learn more about, the fact that CPAS can be a tool, both the planning stages to enhance integration. It can be certainly a tool which is engendering greater use of data technology and advancing the missions work in that regard. And of course, it's a tool trying to, as you were just saying, measure performance and help us understand better what the impact of peacekeeping can be. I'm also very proud of the work that's been done by the team here, led by Kim Taylor and other colleagues who are here, because it has been very much working with missions on the ground, meeting their realities and adapting to their needs. And even as we speak, they're working with missions to streamline methodologies, to try to ensure that a mission as different as UNMOGIP from MINUSCA will find its own way to use this tool. And I'm very frank with the SRSGs I speak to. If this tool isn't useful for you, then I'll be the first to say, let's stop using it. It needs to be useful to you, and it needs to work for missions. But that has meant a lot of trial and error. And it's meant my colleagues here spending time with the missions on the ground, working with them. And so I want to salute them for the effort. And as the report rightly says, it's a worthwhile and imperfect tool with many positives. And I think that's probably something you could say of peacekeeping and perhaps the United Nations as a whole. So I think we can continue on this path with good hopes. And I think particularly what the report points out that in terms of data collection, in terms of impact assessment, in terms of planning, these are all areas where the CPAS tool has shown a lot of promise. And then there are areas we need to work on and continue to strengthen. And the question of leadership, the question of the linkage of CPAS with other tools are key ones, which we are actively looking at. The insights that the IPI report has, I think, are really very useful. We certainly hope that the majority of the recommendations in the CPAS report of IPI will be implemented, because we believe that they'll make the tool all the more useful and contribute to institutionalizing it. So you have two papers today, in effect, and they were developed independently of each other, that of IPI and our own internal assessment. We had done these exercises mission by mission, rolling it out. And once we had rolled out to all the missions, we took a pause and we asked ourselves, what have we learned and what's working and what isn't working. And in DPET, in the department as a whole, but certainly in the division which we work in, I very much welcome that kind of critical analysis, because I think that's the only way in which the worthwhile and the imperfect can remain in good marriage. Both studies show how far we've come with, I think, modest resources in developing and rolling out a system that uses data and trend analysis to help missions understand how to respond to their evolving circumstances, and where they've had an impact. CPAS has enhanced the basis for analysis and the use of data, tried to break down silos in which data is held. And both studies highlight that CPAS is one of the tools that can do that. And that's certainly, as I mentioned, an A4P plus goal. So we see this as something which is advancing the SG's data strategy, the digital transformation strategy, which the department has, and a number of key goals. Lastly, I'll just say that impact and performance of what is now $6.4 billion of peacekeeping activity deserves to be assessed, but needs to be assessed with adequate resourcing. Yesterday, there was a rollout of DPO's extra budgetary request. And one of the things which a number of member states pointed to is how much core mandated activity is currently being done on an extra budgetary basis. A good 90% of the training that we do in peacekeeping is now extra budgetary. You would think that would be unusual for an organization that believes that it wants to deploy 79,000 personnel on an annual basis worldwide, and no other organization that deploys anything like that would do its training on the basis of a hope that there are donors that would be willing to do it. So we do have, I think we're reaching a stretching point in terms of budgets and how peacekeeping is funded. And I think we need to look at that quite seriously. And I would argue that peacekeeping remains actually a very cost-effective tool, and outside actors who have looked at it have reached the same conclusion. So how much fat there is left and how much bone we're cutting into, I think, is a really important question that needs to be asked. I'm delighted to see that both studies concluded that CPAS, as the most advanced tool in promoting the digital transformation of peacekeeping, should be put on a solid footing. The trajectory is clear, but so far we've used extra budgetary resources. We need more data analysts in missions. We need a modest but sustainably sourced team at headquarters. And certainly we count on member state support in the budgetary bodies. And until then, we'll need to rely on the donor community for a little longer. But the truth is currently we're facing a financial cliff for the CPAS team. And certainly we'll be hoping to have some extra budgetary support to continue while we look to institutionalize the tool and strengthen its basis. So finally, just to conclude, thanking the government of the Kingdom of Netherlands for supporting this study and this event. And I want to thank all the partners who've made CPAS possible through generous contributions, a number of member states which are seated here today. I hope we can, as I said, can rely on continued support. And I'll pass over to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And we do really appreciate your willingness to partner with us and for the very constructive relationship that we've had with your team in putting this together. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists for today's session, but I also want to let everyone know we will have a time of Q&A following the panel speakers. So please do be taking note of any questions or comments you'd like to provide. And that also goes for our online audience. We invite you to submit your questions and comments as well using the Q&A function that you see on your screen. So now please allow me to introduce our panelists. First up will be Daniel Forti, sitting on my right, research fellow at IPI's Brian Urquhart Center for Peace Operations, who will share the main findings and recommendations from IPI's report on CPAS. Next will be Major General Patrick Gauchat, who is joining us online and is the head of mission and chief of staff at UNSO, the UN Truce Supervisory Organization. He will be sharing the mission's early experience with CPAS and how the system has been relevant to the work of an observer mission. Next, we will hear from Suleiman Tayoun, Chief of Staff at MINUSCA, the UN Multidimensional Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, who will share some reflections on how this mission, the first adopter of CPAS, has drawn on the system, and he will join us via VTC. And then we will join from Kim Taylor here on my left, who is Chief of the Evaluations Team at the Division of Policy, Evaluation, and Training, who will share a headquarters perspective on lessons learned from CPAS and where they see the system going into the future. So thank you so much to all the panelists for joining us, and I will turn first to Daniel.
Thank you, Jenna, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to discuss this research, and thank you all for the support today. I'll spend my few minutes of time sharing a broad overview of IPI's report, which we published earlier this week, focusing mostly on the report's conclusion and recommendations. I'll try to be as succinct as possible and very much encourage you to read the report if you want to go into more detail on any of the specific issues. First, as a good researcher, we need to define our terms. So for those of you who don't know, what is CPAS? CPAS, in short, is a monitoring and evaluation system designed to help missions assess their own impact and improve their operations. It includes a standalone methodology, tools, and processes, and it draws on both quantitative and qualitative data that missions themselves collect. CPAS features four main components: context mappings, results frameworks, impact assessments, and a standalone IT platform. Our IPI report is divided into four prominent sections. It starts by providing an overview of the CPAS methodology and the system's rollout between August 2018 and December 2021. We have a helpful table on page 6 of the report that provides a status update of CPAS implementation in all missions. The report then assesses CPAS in practice according to three foundational parts of the system: data collection and analysis, impact assessments, and mission planning. The report goes into depth on each of these areas, reflecting on good practices, highlighting persistent challenges, and documenting some useful lessons. I'm happy to touch on some of these points in more detail during the Q&A. The report then examines 6 cross-cutting issues that impact how missions understand, implement, and value CPAS: integration, mission leadership and mission-wide ownership, capacities and skill sets, engagement between CPAS and other peacekeeping tools, thematic priorities for UN peacekeeping, and dynamics between field missions and UN headquarters. Again, the report goes into detail on all of these areas, including the positives and challenges in each, and I'm happy to speak more to them later on. The report then closes with a few conclusions about the way forward for CPAS and provides recommendations to missions, to headquarters, and to member states. This is where I want to devote most of my time this afternoon. So in short, what are some of my key takeaways from this research? As David mentioned, we highlight that CPAS is a worthwhile and imperfect experiment in UN peacekeeping, and it has challenged missions to rethink the ways they assess their own performance and undertake strategic planning. The mere fact that CPAS survived the past 5 years, including through a pandemic, and grew from a pilot project into a full-fledged part of UN peacekeeping reflects that its objectives and methods resonate with the personnel who work with it. In my opinion, there are three aspects of CPAS that are laudable and should drive future innovation across UN peacekeeping. First, CPAS is anchored in the principles of context sensitivity, flexibility, and evidence-driven decision-making. Missions like MINUSCA, UNMIC, and UNSO have very different mandates and structures, but all of them have found some value in CPAS because it translates these approaches into all parts of their work. Second, CPAS depends on integrated and bottom-up approaches to almost all of its functions. When it works as intended, CPAS brings together many parts of a mission to reflect on recent developments, assess the mission's collective performance, and propose recommendations based on what mission personnel themselves are experiencing in their day-to-day work. And third, CPAS is an adaptive system that grows stronger over time. The longer that CPAS operates in a mission, the more effectively personnel can use it to identify trends in the data they collect. In addition, the system's flexibility also allows for missions to regularly adapt their CPAS frameworks to changing country dynamics and to improve the way that they themselves are measuring the impact of their own work. But there are also three prominent aspects of CPAS that need to be addressed head-on to help the system reach its full potential. First, substantive ownership of CPAS needs to expand beyond those who work with the system most closely towards a whole of mission embrace. This shift requires more personnel across missions to feel empowered to use CPAS to help shape their own analysis and to consistently integrate CPAS products into other parts of their work. It also requires mission leadership to better communicate their own data and analytical needs and to provide clearer guidance throughout their missions on how the analysis drawn from CPAS can be most useful to them. Second, CPAS cannot be sustainable if it requires missions to devote significant time and resources to its core processes. This remains among the greatest concerns for mission leadership and personnel alike. CPAS does have a relatively steep learning curve, especially during its startup phase, which has taken up most of the past few years in missions. And it has resulted in time investments that are amplified by limited capacities within missions for strategic planning and data analysis. DPO is very conscious of this challenge and has made multiple adjustments to the CPAS methodology precisely to lighten the load on the personnel who use it, but it's still a present concern that needs to be grappled with. And third, CPAS needs to evolve into a more transparent, inclusive, and outward-facing system. The past few years have naturally been about getting CPAS rolling within the missions themselves, and rightfully so. But now there is a need to gradually incorporate external engagement with CPAS, including it through its frameworks, its data sources, its assessments of missions performance, and its recommendations. And by external, I mean a wide range of stakeholders: UN agencies, funds, and programs in the country, other UN peace operations with overlapping areas of responsibilities, UN headquarters officials with complementary substantive portfolios, and crucially, host country perspectives, including those of the local communities, NGOs, and host government counterparts who work closely with the missions. Those factors need to gradually inform how missions assess their own performance and impact. Fourth, and finally, some of the recommendations. For missions, we recommend the following. And in the report, we break these down into short-term and long-term as well. So we understand some of them can be done right now and others will take time. These recommendations for missions including CPAS-specific information in day-to-day handover notes, sharing the top line of CPAS frameworks, dashboards, and assessments with UN headquarters counterparts, improving how CPAS recommendations are designed, tracked, and communicated within missions, improving how missions themselves report on CPAS impact assessments to member states, including through SG reports, broadening CPAS participation where appropriate, and incorporating local views of mission performance and impact into CPAS frameworks. For UN headquarters, we recommend the following: publishing CPAS fact sheets on UN websites, incorporating CPAS exercises and assessments into senior leadership training courses, expanding training materials on data analysis and visualization for mission personnel, and aligning CPAS with other planning and reporting processes in UN peacekeeping, with a particular emphasis on the results-based budgeting process. Finally, and to close, for member states, we recommend the following: providing consistent political support and attention on CPAS, increasing funding for civilian planning capabilities, data analysis and management skills, and CPAS-related posts in mission and headquarters. And finally, including CPAS in peacekeeping curricula at national peacekeeping and police training centers. I'm really excited to hear from the colleagues we have online and from Kim, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing those findings, and we're looking forward to digging into these a bit more substantively during the Q&A. Next, I would like to turn over to Major General Gauchat. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon in New York from the Middle East. And it's my honor to share a few thoughts about the CPAS and what is happening in UNSO mission. As you know, the mission has historically generated rafts of data across two main mandated functions. First, we have a regional liaison function with 5 countries of the 1948 armistice agreements. And then we deploy well-trained and resourced military observer, so that's our expert on mission, in the different part of Middle East, but specifically to UNIFIL and UNDOF areas, so South Lebanon and Golan Heights, for their mandate implementation. So if we see the data of our mission throughout those 74 years of existence, has not survived all the different modification of the mission and the adaptation. And here I have to say, normally they survive maybe the next weekly or monthly or annual report, but only the institutional knowledge of people that stay in place, so mostly the civilian part of the house, and longest service civilian can bring back a little bit of knowledge. So the CPAS provides here for the first time for UNSO really a system for capturing those data, allowing us to collate them, analyze them, and especially present them as well. And here we always say within the wider UN or with mission stakeholder TCCs, but for UNSO is even more interesting or additionally to present those missions inside the UNSO different component, because we have component in Beirut, in Cairo, in the Golan or in Damascus, and of course all view our work maybe differently, and the CPAS can project image of some function of the mission. Now recently we completed the first mission performance assessment for UNSO, and we were able to refine a little bit how we capture the data and also to adapt or to acquire missing opportunities. I want to mention 2 main mission opportunities that we identify. First, the utilization of fact sheets, and that's are really easy to do it with the CPAS as a visualization tool. And it allows us to better tell the mission story of its continuing relevance. And I insist the relevance of the mission. And this is threefold. First, the essential political value, and that show the commitment of UN in Middle East to pursue of a comprehensive peace in the Middle East. Second is the value of the observation function in support of UNIFIL and UNDOF. And we have to see with this CPAS, we can really show what UNSO is doing in the Middle East for the member state, but also for the TCCs, because the reporting of all our work is done through UNIFIL and UNDOF. So in one point here with the CPAS, we can take out of all the work of the military observer and also show the people supporting the mission, especially the TCC that pay ultimately the salary of the military observer, what they do, and the relevance of their work. And also, finally, the third one is the regional liaison contribution for analyzing and addressing complex political, but also security issue, especially when it's not covered for other mission. So that's really this utilization of fact sheet that I can take with me, or we can show the different partners. And it's very important when we talk about this regional function to have a view on maybe an Egyptian view on the mission, or a Syrian view on a mission, an Israeli view on a mission, because all the different value can be adapted and can be also shown for the main interlocutor that we are talking with. The second point really about the opportunity will be the leverage about the analytical and function, but the analysis of the region, not only by UNSO, but also in really collaboration with other peacekeeping mission. And we have really developed something very interesting with UNDOF, and we are still developing with UNIFIL. And when you have the same people delivering the mandate of the Security Council in an area, it's really useful to have this exchange of view, and it's a simple tool to be to enhance complementarity and again both at operation and strategic value for achieving the UN goal here in Middle East. So this regional aspect of the CPAS is really now under development here in Middle East. I will stop here and over to you.
Thank you so much for those remarks, and in particular, very interesting to see how it is allowing the mission to tell its story and to demonstrate its continued political relevance, and also the way in which it's able to facilitate collaboration with other missions in the region. So thank you so much for those comments. Next, I would like to turn to Mr. Tayoun. Please go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, and good afternoon all. Good evening to Patrick, of course, and thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share thoughts on CPAS and provide you with some mission-based perspective and how this tool has been used in MINUSCA. As it was already mentioned, MINUSCA was the first mission to launch CPAS. And so far, MINUSCA has successfully completed 5 performance assessments and accumulated over 3 years of data collected from all parts of the mission. MINUSCA is also currently using its 3rd iteration of its CPAS result framework, which was most recently updated at the beginning of this year to reflect the more recent dynamics in terms of the situation in Central African Republic, namely the need to revitalize the peace agreement, what you call usually here the APPR. In its current version, the MINUSCA CPAS is being used to track the progress in security and protection of civilians, the implementation of the peace agreement, so the APPR, the return and extension of state authority, the preparation and delivery of peaceful local elections. More specifically, on peace agreement, one of the identified intended impacts being monitored through the CPAS is the progress in the implementation of the peace agreement, including the security measures, but also how this peace agreement can successfully de-escalate tensions and build momentum towards peace. For this purpose, the mission has identified a series of indicators that relate to the engagement of different parties to the peace agreement, as well as indicators on the effectiveness of the implementation bodies of the peace agreement. These indicators come from a large variety of sources within the mission, such as the force on the ceasefire violations, the political affairs on the effectiveness of the APPR mechanism and institution, the GMAC on the armed group adherence to the peace agreement, the DDR, on the number of ex-combatants being disarmed, etc. So all these taken together allow the mission to have a broad overview to better understand the situation, but also identify the specific areas where additional efforts need to be made. This consolidation of all this information under one unique repository is itself a big change and a major step forwards in allowing the mission to adapt its response to maximize its impacts and in an integrated manner. Also of note is that the current MINUSCA CPAS result framework also includes indicators and data that are fed directly from the SAGE. SAGE is the tool we use for situational awareness, which also help in reducing the need for section to report the same information across different tools. Another innovation is that OCHA is now also directly providing, since recently, data in CPAS, notably on the number of incidents against humanitarian workers, but also on the number of internally displaced persons. This demonstrates that CPAS is also a tool, as Daniel was saying, that gains from UN-wide integration to not only improve its understanding on the situation, but also its impact on the ground. Another way that the mission is also envisioning the use of CPAS for its integrated planning and operation is by capitalizing on need for the joint operation planning team. The joint operation planning team, the aim of the GOPT, as we call it here, is to provide coherence and coordination to MINUSCA's substantive and support components on action to enhance motion coordination operation, as well as synchronize MINUSCA operation and operational planning based on informed and coordinated decision making. And for this purpose, the GOPT will be relying on the data collected through CPAS to have an accurate picture of the current operational situation. I would like also to add that the CPAS enables the mission to increase the use of data analytics and visualization tools to help inform decision making, but also in strategic communication. But for this particular point, we have to confess that we need to improve and beef up the training of our colleagues in the strategic communications so that we can better perform. As it was said also at the beginning, MINUSCA has been the spearheading, spearheading the use of CPAS infographic in a fact sheet submitted to the Security Council, something that has been considered right now as a best practice for other missions and help better communicate to member states some of the achievements made by the mission on the ground. So it's a lot. I could continue and talk about also some of the project, like now making sure that our mission support will be using also the CPAS so that we know we can see the impact of the logistic or non-logistic support on the operation, etc. We do have some challenges, and I would like to thank Daniel he highlighted the fact that we are very short in staffing. All is concentrating under the responsibility of the GMPU or Joint Mission Planning Unit. We try to have and requested one additional staff specifically for the CPAS. Unfortunately, it was rejected by the member states. We will continue, and we're continuing internally to generate at least one post because it's extremely important. One other challenge, of course, is the quick turnover of the uniform personnel. We train them, they get excellent, and then we lose them overnight. And then you have to go and do the same and make sure that you train and you try to keep the institutional memory. I would like to thank, that's my last word, DPED for their support, for their guidance. They have been really excellent for that. and we look forward to continue, seeing them supporting us remotely, but also coming for this field visit, and of course, continuing the engagement with them to better use this tool, because it still has some great capacity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for those points. And one in particular, I'm hoping we can come back to later, is not only how CPAS can help to capture and relay information, but in particular, how it can help to inform decision-making. So hoping we can come back to that a bit more during the Q&A. But now I'm very happy to turn the floor over to Kim. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Jenna. It's lovely to be here, because I think the last time you and I were supposed to be on a panel, a global pandemic was breaking out, and so that was a bit cut off, that discussion. But and it's interesting to think about how much has happened with the CPAS since then. I'd really like to thank Daniel and IPI and the Kingdom of Netherlands for supporting this study and this event today. I also really appreciate the comments of Major General Gauchard and Chief of Staff Thioune about the perspectives of their field missions, because CPAS is a true partnership between headquarters and the field, and we're very proud of that. It is the peacekeeping operations who have really implemented the CPAS, who've brought it to life, experimented with it, innovated, improved it, and made it is what it is today. And I'd really like to express my appreciation to them for their hard work. And as Suleiman mentioned, MINUSCA was the very first mission, and looking back now, they were so courageous because the CPAS was really in its infancy then. As a couple of other speakers have mentioned, the IPI report describes CPAS, amongst other things, as ambitious, worthwhile, and imperfect. And I think this is an excellent description, because it reflects how badly needed and important the CPAS is, but also at the same time, how challenging it is to operationalise an impact assessment system. And both reports find that the CPAS has had a notable impact in mission planning, data collection and analysis, and impact assessment. This is important because it highlights that assessments are not done in a vacuum. They're done across the mission and are intrinsically connected to planning, data, and analysis. So that also means that the CPAS traverses a number of pre-existing systems and systemic challenges. For example, peacekeeping has long struggled with silos in missions, which limits coordination in environments where that coordination is desperately needed. The report really finds that CPAS is helping break down silos inside missions, giving military, police, and civilians a space to work together more closely and to collaborate on how to strengthen operations. I believe MINUSCA started this phrase, but is what's known amongst the missions now as the CPAS effect. Peacekeeping has really long struggled to build an impact assessment system in environments as complex as those we're operating in. And in fact, before the CPAS, there was a widely held belief that it wasn't possible. So it's great to see a report that affirms that we are really meeting this challenge and using data not only to assess our impact, but to start to strengthen it. And as we learn from across the missions, we can also look to help strengthen peacekeeping overall. And I think that's very significant, because the number of ways that peacekeeping has to improve itself are rarely expanding these days. Our budgets are very tight. We've updated and issued guidance and policy in numerous areas. People are working at maximum capacity. So anything that allows us to both improve our performance and improve how we communicate our impact is worth paying attention to. And in that regard, I think it's worth noting in particular what the report says about data. One of the critical achievements of the CPAS is to centralise and strengthen data in peacekeeping, and then to use that data visualisation to communicate better, which both Major General Gauchard and Chief of Staff Thioune touched upon. Data represents one of the few new tools at peacekeeping's disposal to improve performance, and the opportunities for leveraging the data are immense, and not just in terms of assessing our impact, but also supporting that improved integration within a mission that I mentioned before, as well as enhancing the implementation of thematic areas such as women, peace and security and protection. Both papers highlight a number of challenges and opportunities for the CPAS as well, including addressing concerns about time and resources, strengthening data, and lack of dedicated capacity for data planning and assessment, both in the field and at headquarters. We have been working actively with the missions to streamline the CPAS since the very beginning to make it lighter and faster, and we've implemented already numerous changes to address that. But this is always going to be an ongoing process which we will continue to pursue. CPAS has also done a lot, as I said before, to improve data collection and usage. And again, both colleagues in the field mentioned how that's helping them. And of course, we'll continue to work on this as it's really the future. But we are now also at the point where broader questions about how data is used in peacekeeping and the UN are being also addressed through larger policy approaches, including peacekeeping's digital transformation strategy and the SG's data strategy, both of which CPAS strongly supports and helps implement. The lack of dedicated capacity for data planning and assessment is, however, the greatest single challenge facing the CPAS at the moment. In the field, only a handful of missions have integrated planning units, which is an astonishing thing when you think about what our operations are doing and the components that are operating there. Some of our missions don't even have planning units at all. And almost no missions have data analysts located in these planning units. And at headquarters, the situation is just as extreme. 80% of the team that supports the CPAS is funded by extra budgetary contributions. So I should now actually really just express my enormous gratitude to the member states who have provided us with the extra budgetary funding that's really enabled us to build and roll out the CPAS. We would not be here without them. But now that CPAS is a proven and a much needed tool, creating long-term data planning and assessment capacity in the field and at headquarters is a pressing and urgent priority. CPAS is one tool that's helping us to get there, but as we can all see from IPI's report, there are still ways to improve and strengthen the CPAS. I'm really grateful for the recommendations laid out in the report on how to take the CPAS forward, and I'm really looking forward to discussing the CPAS with you today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim, for those comments. And now we're really happy to open up the floor to a bigger conversation. We want to invite colleagues that are here with us in person and those that are joining us online for any interventions you would like to make in general or to specific members of the panel. If you are online, please use the Q&A function. If you'd like to make an intervention from the floor, you can raise your hand and some of our colleagues will be bringing a mic around. But I believe first we have an intervention from Colonel Werner Knapp, the military advisor at the Permanent Mission of Germany to the UN. Colonel, if you would like to raise your hand so our colleagues can. Do we have a microphone? Thank you, it's coming. Up in the front, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Colonel Werner Knapp, the German military advisor, and thanks to IPI, to the Netherlands and to the UN for organizing that meeting, and of course for organizing or for supporting the CPAS. I remember that 4 years ago I was in the Netherlands at a conference of a Dutch strategic think tank on how important is data collection for UN missions. And now I see how far we have come meanwhile. And I think I would have loved to have this when I was in MINUSMA as responsible for operations in 2017 and 18. Of course, Germany is supporting the implementation of CPAS, as this has proven that it will have an impact on the measure of performance. However, and let me echo what has been said already from the experts, collection is important, but it has to be analyzed, not only collected. And you need well-trained personnel for that to inform eventually, as Ms. Taylor said, the decision-making process, and that is what is required. And of course, I heard from the field that there are, and the proposal was to have some data sheets. As a TCC, PCC, I would love to be more involved into those information that might give us the chance to prepare our troops, or we as Germany are performing training for other TCCs to enhance our training for other PCCs. You might take this into consideration to share this on a broader view. And of course, though imperfect, I take that point, but it has a very important task with regard to the strategic communication of the United Nations, which means that we have to tell the audience, the national and the international audience, that peacekeeping is important, is relevant, and will further improve. And thank you for that.
Thank you so much for that. And before I turn it back to our panel, maybe just to take a couple of other interventions, two of which are coming from our online space. Related to the idea of sharing information, which I know that came up in some of Daniel's recommendations as well. One of the comments from online is how much CPAS data and analysis will be available to independent researchers, bearing in mind the valuable contributions that independent researchers can make to the study of peace operations. And this corresponds very much with some discussions I've been hearing recently as well, more broadly with DPO, about how DPO can do a better job partnering with researchers in order to draw on some of that analysis and how that can feed into decision making. So I think some general questions about how the information and analysis can be shared more broadly. And then a second question to put on the floor. The expected benefits of CPAS may also be applicable to SPMs. As such, what steps are being taken to expand CPAS to all peace operations, including SPMs? So Kim, maybe I can turn to you first. Thanks.
Sure, thank you. We think it's important that as the data and analysis is built up, that as much of it be shared as possible. But of course, the missions are working in very complex environments, and so some of that information will not be shareable, but what can be shared should be shared. Missions and peacekeeping in general is just starting to get comfortable with using data. I think we should underestimate how far missions have come in using data in the way that they are now, which they really weren't doing 5 years ago. And I think there is a genuine fear that the more data you put out there, the more that data will later turn out to be unreliable or incorrect, because when you're collecting data in complex conflicts, sometimes you can get it wrong. So I definitely think that there needs to develop an acknowledgement that we will be sharing more, but we will also need to do that in the spirit of understanding that we're constantly reviewing and strengthening the data. And of course, we would not have collaborated with IPR on this report if we didn't think it was important that researchers be able to access some of that data. Having said that, too, each mission owns their own data. So it is up to each mission to decide what it wants to share. But this push into strategic communications using CPAS data and analysis will hopefully be the start of putting this more in the public domain. As for the SPMs, at the moment, the CPAS is not present in them. The methodology works for them, but of course, there's a much larger number of SPMs and they're much wider width of structure and size. Some of them are very, very small. So they would at best need a much more modified amount of methodology for it. As David and I both stressed, we have a major funding problem just keeping 12 missions properly supported with the CPAS. So it's really financially, quite aside from any other considerations, not a viable extension for us at this point in time.
Yes, other interventions from the floor. I think we have one up in the front.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Vincent. I'm the military advisor at the Permanent Mission of Switzerland. Thank you to IPI for organizing this event. Thank you to the Netherlands for having this set up, and to the UN, of course, for all the work that comes in establishing CPAS and keeping it alive. I'm I like when I see CPAS as an acronym with two Ps. I didn't see it in the report with two Ps. It's more a comment, but I think you captured that very well, Daniel, in your report, that the data collection and the analysis part is running rather well or is improving in a way, but then the connection to the planning part is much more tricky. It's also something that we have observed in the mission when we had the opportunities to go there or work in the missions, that moving to the planning part is obviously much more difficult. And the CPAS is proving that it can do the impact assessment, but it has to convince the people on the ground that it's a good tool then to move into the plan and move that data into the planning part. But that's why I think from the member state side, we're always trying to put two Ps in the acronym so that people really realize that it's not only a performance assessment thing, but it's really about planning and then eventually having a good result. But I have two specific questions, and I think it's also touched upon in your report, Daniel. The integration of the RC part of UN presence on the ground, so the funds, agencies, and program country teams on the ground, they don't necessarily contribute to the CPAS, of course, but I think the problem is much wider than that, that there is a lack of coordination on the ground, often between what is being done within the UN country team and what the missions are doing. So my question is the CPAS a tool to bridge that gap, or do we have a different, more systemic issue on the ground to bring these two UN presences on the ground together? So that's the first one. And the second one is related to the RBB with the budgeting cycle. You mentioned that also in your report. I understand that there are difficulties to bring the CPAS cycle together with the RBB cycle, but I'm wondering, is it something that we as member state need to change something, because there is an issue that has to be solved by the member states because we gave directions that are different to the Secretariat, or is it something that the Secretariat is able to resolve itself or even within the mission? So just to get a better understanding would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. I have a few questions on the list here. So I'd like to turn first back to our colleagues in the mission to see if you can comment a bit more on how CPAS can connect better with planning and decision making. So we've heard a lot about how it can help to gather and assess data, but how can this connect to planning? Is this something that you feel like is happening well in the missions right now? And can you give example? And if there's still a gap here, maybe you can speak to that a bit. So maybe if it's okay, I'll turn first to Major General Goucha, and then we'll turn over to Suleiman. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions. For the military advisor of Germany, just one point, the fact sheets can be made available, of course. And is it okay? I hear a lot of sound.
We hear you okay.
Okay, so definitely the fact sheets are available for training purpose. It's very simple. First, we have a tool, CPAS, that allows to focus on the different item that we want to pass. Second, we don't have much of secret or top secret activity. We don't have that in the military observation mission. For the question of Colonel Schoffer, Swiss advisor, planning part, it's interesting. I would give two examples. The first one, the CPAS allow me to have a feedback of all the meetings I have in the 5 countries. I have with a country official something like 40 to 50 meetings per year. And we can classify this meeting as positive or negative or neutral. And we can also mention if there are some demand or not. So in that sense, the planification first show where there are a need of taking more care of some requests from a hosting country, and we are in chapter 6, so we have to listen absolutely what the hosting countries want, so we can focus more about meetings, more meetings, or focus about the request of hosting countries here. In that sense, either the work in the mission or also through our reporting towards UN HQ, which they can also help us with their meeting with the, for example, the permanent mission of the said hosting country. Maybe another tool, very practical. Let's take the example in UNIFIL area. We have, for example, some restriction of movement on patrols. So the CPAS can show us if we have diversion, have we changed the roads of the patrol, have we diminished the number of patrol in a sector. And that's a key tool for here the Observe Group Lebanon that is working under OPCON of the Force Commander UNIFIL. So ultimately, the UNIFIL Force Commander can feel the pulse, what is exactly happening with one or few incidents on the field, and does he has to take some correction measures. So definitely here you have two examples about planning help from the CPAS system. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those examples. Suleiman, would you like to add anything on the point about connecting with planning?
Oh, sorry. Yes. First of all, I'd like to say something also on the integration. That one of the military colleague talked about between OCHA and the agencies and the programs. I think that is not the problem is more the integration and how we achieve integration within the UN system than the CPAS itself. We could here in MINUSCA have and get the data from OCHA because we have a very good relationship with OCHA. And one of the forum in which we work together, we call it the OCT. Every time we have some incident on the ground, we set up an operational team meeting, and OCHA is present, and OCHA participate and give some action points, and that's how you build relationship and make sure that a tool like CPAS also can be, let's say, fed up by OCHA data. So it's not really the gap can be filled by the work we do in terms of integration in the field, rather than the CPAS is a different tool. It's independent. I mean, it's different from what we do to integrate all the bodies within the same geographic area. Regarding planning, some specific point on the RBB and the CPAS. Just in one example, we could align in MINUSCA during the last budget session. We could align 22 out of 23 RBB indicators with the CPAS. So they are not incompatible, but we do think here that the problem is the RBB, because the CPAS is very flexible. And why the RBB is really something that we find a little bit odd, and does not allow necessarily the flexibility that we can have in the with the CPAS. However, as I said earlier, we can still manage to align RBB indicators and CPAS indicators. So that's what I wanted to add as a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Daniel, maybe I can turn over to you for the point about the integration of the RCs and whether or not you find CPAS is a tool that could potentially help with that.
Sure, I'll start with that, but I'll also take the liberty to jump on a few of the other points that were raised. You know, in terms of bringing UN country teams together with missions, I think CPAS is certainly useful, but shouldn't be expected to be the only thing or the key driver of that. What we saw with missions is a variety of ways of bringing members of the country team into the fold. And I think it's a bit easier when in missions where you have multidimensional integrated presences through the offices of triple hat DSRSGs. That gives a natural entry point for regular conversations. We've seen some missions incorporate specific data collected by agencies directly into their CPAS framework. So it's either on a monthly or quarterly basis, you're getting data on IDP or refugee movements or migration trends. There are a couple examples, and those are feeding into the overall CPAS frameworks. And that's a low-hanging fruit, and I think that's an important place to start. We've seen in a couple of instances, you've had members of the country team and the RC's office participate in these CPAS processes, which are the context mapping and the performance assessment. So you are getting colleagues with different perspectives, different institutional mandates, contributing to that broader mission-wide conversation. But again, with lots of challenges with missions and country teams, it's a gradual process that deals with relationships, that deals with institutions, that deals with alignment. And I think CPAS is helpful to keep that conversation going. It's helpful to actually show direct, concrete outcomes of what collaboration looks like, but it shouldn't be viewed as the sole source and put all of those eggs in that basket. Just to touch quickly on a few of the other points, on data and data ownership, I really do want to stress that CPAS is part of this larger conversation and process within the UN about how it uses data more effectively and more systematically. I mean, just to give you an example, prior to CPAS, you had a lot of different sections reporting to headquarters in static Word documents and Excel sheets, which are good for tracking, but it's hard to do iterative analysis over time, to draw trends, to bring together multiple data streams. And CPAS has forced mission personnel to start grappling with that reality and to start changing the ways they should do that. I think the other thing I really wanted to stress about the data side is, what makes CPAS so valuable is that it's trying to collect data on outcome and impacts, not just on outputs. It's a pretty low bar to report and collect data on how many trainings are delivered, but to understand the impact of those trainings, for example, through both quantitative and qualitative data, that's really hard to do. And so I think that's something that missions are gradually growing more comfortable with. They're having trial and error. And what I think the important takeaway of that is it's still very much in the progress and improvement phase. So for some missions, as Kim alluded to, there's going to be some reticence to give up ownership of that data because they themselves are still trying to work on how to actually do that better, to make sure what they're capturing actually reflects impact and outcome. But my 2 cents is if there's data and finalized data that goes to member states, it should be made available to the public. And I think the fact sheets are where you clearly see that data that the missions feel comfortable collecting, reporting on, verified, reflects the impact they're having. And if that gets presented in a public document, I think that's the kind of data that external audiences, researchers would benefit from as well. On the SPM point, completely agree. It's the objectives of what CPAS is trying to do should be replicable in an SPM, but dealing with refined methodology, dealing with a capacity issue, dealing with this learning curve would be the same types of challenges. So it's a long-term question for the UN as an entire system, not something that can just sort of be cut and paste from peacekeeping into SPMs. On the RBB, maybe just to express a moment of humility that this was one of the hardest parts of the research for me, just to understand the RBB and all of these processes. But I think to grapple with the magnitude of the challenge, let's just look at sort of the cycles for the RBB and what that means for planning. Budgets are approved in July of each year. September of the next year, missions are already beginning to plan for the following year's budget. So how can you plan for a following year's budget without drawing on what you're doing now? So missions end up looking at the impact in budgetary purposes of what they've done the year before to plan for the year ahead. And so, there are lots of different ways that we talk about in the report. I'll leave to my UN colleagues to get the details and the process is right, but it's a larger conversation that needs to be had within the UN, among the member states and with the Secretariat and missions about how to make this work for everyone. And the process is starting. It's not like it's at zero. I think in the past year, there have already been some conversations between DPO, the Office of the Controller, to start that foundation. And then lastly, on the planning point, I think one thing that I continue to grapple with is planning is not just a simple sort of cut and dry process. You need contributions from all levels of missions to really make this work. You need mission leadership to have clear planning processes and indicate what their needs are and what their decision points are. You have the policy processes where planning takes place, whether it is through the budget, a mission plan, working with the country team on either an integrated strategic framework or a UN development cooperation framework, which provides a whole of UN response in that country. So there are lots of different policy processes where strategic planning occurs. And then you also have the individual and section level planning, which are still more linked to RBB outputs than they are the mission's impact. And then you have the realities of political strategies, and the UN's political engagement is what should be the overarching chapeau for all of this. And how do you align all these processes? How do you make them flexible, responsive, adaptable? It's something that we say, it's easy to say planning needs to improve, and I take that liberty of being outside the UN to say that, with the full humility that it's not something that can fix overnight and requires lots of work from all parts of the system to make that progress. Thanks.
Thanks so much. We have a number of interventions still from online, and we're happy to take more from the floor. So please go ahead and put a hand up if you'd like to intervene, but maybe I can take a few of the online ones and I'll try to group them a bit. And I'm going to take the liberty of integrating my own as well. Maybe this next set we can put under the theme of maybe how CPAS can be expanded and used maybe in some potentially new ways in the future. One of the points I would like to bring back in and connecting to the idea of strategic communications, which of course is a really important topic being discussed a lot right now. So I think we've heard a bit about how CPAS can be used to communicate out, whether with TCCs and PCCs, sharing the impact of the missions with local communities, but I'd also like to bring in the idea of how local communities can maybe help to feed in a bit. So I know this is one of the points that Daniel mentioned in his recommendations, and I'm wondering, maybe Kim, you can speak to this about whether and how you've thought about how local communities can feed in to the type of impact that's being measured. And I'll list a couple of other points that were brought up. One of them is asking about whether CPAS can help to support efforts aimed at sequencing and prioritizing mandates during the mandate review process. And another related point notes that WPS is one of the cross-cutting themes across A4P+, and whether or not CPAS can help to collect information on the meaningful participation of women in peacekeeping, including in SSR, military, and police, in order to measure progress against the targets that have been made. So maybe Kim, over to you if you have a few thoughts on that.
Thanks, Jenna. So local communities can definitely feed into the CPAS. It's really supposed to be a very inclusive process, and other stakeholders can be involved in the context mapping. They can even be involved in parts of the impact assessment. So it really depends on each mission and how they're working with their stakeholders, but we do encourage that. On the question about supporting sequencing and prioritising mandates, this is in effect exactly what the CPAS does, because we talk about sequencing, but we don't actually have a number of great tools at helping us do that. The CPAS focuses on having a very lean results framework. It's not supposed to replicate the RBB. It's not supposed to cover every single thing a mission is doing. Instead, it's focusing on the highest priorities of the leadership as derived from the mandate at that point in time. And Daniel's report really emphasises the flexibility of the CPAS. It's one of its greatest assets. The idea is its framework is not locked in advance and then unchangeable like the RBB is. You can change the framework as often as you need to. And we've seen missions do that. We've seen when peace agreements have suddenly broken out or talks have broken down, the mission has turned back to its framework, reassessed its context and adjusted the framework. And this is really then helps you with sequencing. And so missions are also learning that the components that, right now might not be their time in the sun for their work, but they can understand and see the other parts that need to fall into place first, and then their issues will come to the top of the framework. And on the women, peace and security, CPAS absolutely helps collect information for this. So one thing that we've actually done, it's an innovation with the CPAS, So WPS, the global indicators are included in a mission's CPAS results framework if they are relevant to that mission's results framework, which means that some of the global indicators are not in the frameworks. So what we've done, and we really worked with the gender team in DPO since the outset of the CPAS, is we actually essentially provide a data service to the gender team. So all the data on the global WPS indicators is actually collated and stored in the CPAS system. And the gender team in headquarters actually accesses that, is able to display the visuals through the dashboards and see how the progress is going. And we think this is a really important service that the CPAS provides. It's a natural extension of the centralization of the data. And, not only does it help monitor the WPS indicators globally for peacekeeping, but it also, the way that gender is incorporated into the CPAS in each mission helps all the components of the mission understand the gender implications of their work. So I think it's actually very powerful, not just in relation to WPS, but as I mentioned before, in a number of thematic areas for peacekeeping. Thanks.
Thank you. Any interventions from the floor? Yes, please. The mic is coming.
Thank you. Frédéric Ono, I work for DPO in program management function. I had a question. We heard a lot about the benefits of the CPAS to strengthen strategic management and decision-making, in particular in missions, obviously. And I've seen it certainly indeed that it's been a driver, including a driver for cultural change in terms of the appreciation of the importance of strategic management. We've also heard that critically there's a resource gap, right? And I would say it's a resource gap, not just for CPAS, but actually, as we heard, for strategic planning, for any function related to data, to CPAS specifically, but also risk management. All the functions that you would expect need to be integrated and need to be available to missions. Now, I wanted to, under the rubric of looking forward, I wanted to ask you questions to the panel members on how CPAS could be leveraged to support better and strengthen strategic oversight by headquarters at a first level. Because to be honest, and that's obviously a personal opinion, but I don't see any very structured approach to strategic oversight of missions by headquarters. And at the same time, I see a lot of potential in the use of data that's, is being created by CPAS. So what would you see as the potential utilization of CPAS to strengthen the strategic oversight of missions by headquarters? I'm seeing that in the perspective of eyes on, hands off, right? Not more opportunities to meddle into the operational, which traditionally is what the department did, but again, ensuring still that this strategic oversight is strengthened, and at a higher level, the potential for CPAS and CPAS data to be leveraged by member states to ensure their own higher level strategic oversight. Both in reporting to the Security Council, but also maybe, enticing member states in the General Assembly to look less at the terms of reference for P3 post and more in terms of, the impact that they see reflected, hopefully, at some point in the RBB. Was curious to hear opinions on that.
Thank you for that. Any other interventions we can take before? Yes, thank you. Sorry, the mic is coming.
No, I don't need it.
No, the VTC won't hear you. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Glenn Sadowski, I'm just the Deputy MILAD at the U.S. mission. And thank you for putting this together. The U.S. is a big proponent and supporter of the CPAS system. In fact, I have the honor to be sitting to the left of one of the drivers of Security Council Resolution 2436, which we believe led to the foundations of CPAS and putting it forward, because the United States was really concerned about performance and wanting feedback so that we could make better mandates and better use of the resources that we provide to missions. And what we heard here briefed, especially at the mission level, a lot of talk about fact sheets and data analysis that drives planning. There's a lot of things out in the missions that do that already, like the JMAC and whatnot. But later on in the mission, what I heard from Daniel and my Swiss counterpart, and this gentleman back here, is what the United States would like to see from CPAS. Something that drives the coordination of the mission, that breaks down the barriers you talk about for integrated planning that we've talked about 5 years ago, or even maybe 10 years ago, and here we are talking about it again. We poo-poo the RBB, but that is something that needs to be done. Where did these resources go? Will CPAS tell us this? Will CPAS give the feedback to the member states who drive the agency funds and programs through their voluntary contributions? They need the feedback to say, hey, these programs are working, these are not. And these programs are working in conjunction with what the SRSG is trying to do out in mission. They should be reinforced, and these ones shouldn't be. And that's what CPAS should strive for. And that is where the United States would like to lend their help in any way we can to see CPAS become more than what it is just now. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. And maybe in addressing that, we can also address a bit the tension of the fact that member states, especially over the past several years, have been asking for increased accountability and measuring impact and assessing performance. And at the same time, missions have had a very hard time getting the funding that they need to staff these positions and to get the requisite training and positions in mission that are needed to do this. So if there's a way also to try to reconcile the increased demand from member states and yet the shortage from some member states when it comes to resources. So maybe Daniel, I'll turn to you first and then to Kim.
Sure. Thanks a lot, colleagues. Really, really good and tough questions. I think the phrase eyes on, hands off is a good one, because I think one of the things that I really cherish about CPAS and in this research, it's that it's mission owned and mission driven. I mean, we can't say that enough. Something that the missions themselves invest and find value, and not just, feel that it's a headquarters initiative driven upon them, changes the mentality and the buy-in you have to this. So I think that's something that, we need to keep in mind and not try and change that about CPAS. There are lots of other headquarter requests and demands on missions that try and do that. But nonetheless, I think this is why, as part of my findings and recommendations, I encourage that the top line findings of how missions evaluate their performance and their impact, and in which areas they think they're doing well and they're not doing well, needs to be communicated more widely within the UN and across different headquarters entities. If a mission says that they're performing well in this part of their mandate and they're not, and they have data to do that, that shouldn't be within the mission's purview alone. I think there are lots of factors and analysis that can explain, what were the reasons why performance has improved or not improved over a period of time, and having all of the UN entities, both in the country and at headquarters, on the same page of how the mission is analyzing itself is a really important place to get to. And I think we can see CPAS helping the UN get there, but it will take additional steps on that. And in terms of the higher level reporting to member states, part of this is why the RBB question is so important, because ultimately you do want to have that connection between where is the money going and what impact is the mission having by spending this money. And I think that's why it's so difficult and challenging to grapple with this question, and doing the reforms of how CPAS and the RBB align needs to be done carefully, but it needs to happen in the long term. And also, I think that's where the SG reports come in too. We've seen a number of missions, I don't have the exact figures in here, but I think it's in both my report and DPO's report, that CPAS is starting to inform SG reports more regularly, both in terms of the data and also the recommendations. I also argue that the SG reports should have synopses of how missions are using CPAS to evaluate themselves. So if there are certain parts of a mandated priority that you think you're doing well, whether it's on supporting a peace agreement or working on an issue like DDR, and the mission itself uses CPAS to say it's having high performance in that area, I think that should be communicated in the SG reports. And if it's not, and if there are areas where there isn't progress, similarly, the more engagement at that top level of what the missions are concluding and bringing that to the member states is really helpful. I think that's, yeah, thanks for that.
Thanks. Over to you, Kim.
Thank you. I very much agree with the Deputy Millard, and I think that CPAS is driving coordination and helping break down barriers with integrated planning, but it still has a long way to go. I mean, the point I made at the start is very true for the Deputy Millard's comments, but also Frederick's comments. CPAS gives us this very powerful tool, particularly with the data, but it's not a panacea. It doesn't fix all the other systemic issues that peacekeeping faces, but it does provide a tool to try and grapple with in a very practical way forward with it. And so, I think driving integrated planning will continue, and the missions are already seeing benefits from that. And bodies like the JMAC do participate in the CPAS. I mean, that is one of the big strengths of the CPAS. It brings all the components together. This CPAS effect is very powerful. And I would also add that components just don't contribute to the CPAS. They give, but they also take. So components like JMAC should actually be able to do their work better through the CPAS, and particularly the data sharing. on Frederick's question about strengthening strategic management and oversight, yes, you can leverage the CPAS to help with this. You can understand the impact the missions are having better. You can share the data. But as I said before, there are other things that impact that relationship between headquarters and the field. And I would just note and pick up on Daniel's point too, that the SG reports are being increasingly informed by CPAS data and analysis. We see that happening regularly now. And we hope by the end of this year, we will actually see CPAS infographics starting to appear in SG reports, which I think is also really important. But I think also, if I might, on this issue about strategic management and oversight by headquarters, I'd also be interested to know what our colleagues in the field think about that question. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. And I will turn over to the field colleagues in 1 minute, but I think we have time for one more intervention from the floor if anyone else would like to comment or question. Otherwise, I'll loop in one other comment we had from online and a question I had as well. You mentioned a number of times that one of the strengths of CPAS is flexibility and how the mission can respond based on changing context. How do you balance flexibility and adaptability with consistency? One of the value adds of data and consistent data collection is being able to measure trends over long periods of time. So just in terms of the process, how do you manage adapting to a changing situation, but also wanting to collect data across a consistent area for a period of time? And a related question from online is what types of efforts are made at headquarters to ensure that missions are collecting consistent data? So maybe if we can address that, actually, I'll turn back to you first, Kim, and then I'd like to turn back to our colleagues in the field for a final word from them as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that question about the sweet spot between flexibility and adaptability with consistency is something that the missions are constantly working on. One of the big benefits, as you said, Jenna, is that you can show trends over time. I would emphasize that the results frameworks, what we're seeing is they can change, but largely considerable sections of them are staying quite consistent. You can also keep indicators and you can keep collecting data against them, particularly if the data collation is automatic. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing an assessment on that data, but it is collecting and it is sitting there ready to be used when you need it. So I think that's how you sort of manage the two different ends of the spectrum. And on the question about the types of efforts, how we're trying to make sure the data is consistent, I think that's a very valid question. And now that we actually have sufficient amounts of data starting to build up in the system, we actually just hired a consultant to look at that question for us, to give us an independent perspective on it. And so this is something that needs to be worked on. But as I said before, these are also broader questions for peacekeeping in the UN about how uniform it wants its approach to data to be. And that's not only a peacekeeping question, that's also a UN question, because to go to that broader question about working with other partners, yes, we do want to work with other partners and we want to collaborate on data, but you need some agreed fundamental principles on how the data has been collected and how it's used and so forth. So again, CPAS can do its part, but there are bigger issues that now that the CPAS is successful, it's really starting to grapple with.
Thanks, and I'd like to turn back to our field colleagues for the final word, and you're welcome to comment on that last question, but I would also invite you to comment maybe on what you view as the most important next steps for CPAS, in particular for MINUSCA, which has been using CPAS for the longest period of time. You've gone through 5 reporting cycles now and have learned some really valuable lessons. What do you see as maybe the most important area of growth or the most important next step? Any other final comments you'd like to make? The floor is yours. Let me turn over first to Mr. Tayoun.
Thank you so much. We here in MINUSCA really think that the next important step will be to align all the planning tools. I think it's something that is extremely important for us. And also to beef up a little bit or inform the decision making. We have this all this assessment, but I think that we need to be doing it much more regularly. and in order to measure the performance every time that we reach some step in the mandate implementation. We are doing it, and that I have to say that in the leadership needs to all of them and all together need to own this tool, the CPAS, and doing so, I think that will be much more performing. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. Major General, over to you for any final comments.
Thank you so much. I will just mention about the consistency and quality of what we report in the CPAS. Of course, we should maybe in mission have a data specialist, and that is in a whole strategy of from the SG and all trickling down to the mission. And here we have this. We have received a tool that I find very useful, the CPAS, but then again, to have a data specialist, we have to go to all the hurdle of the fifth committee, ACABQ, and so on to change or to upgrade or re-engineer one of our position. The CPAS, of course, should be having a Passerelle with other platforms like Sage and other. It has some improvement, and of course that should come definitely from the HQ, because we cannot do that in the field. But for UNSO, that is a mission without a JMAC, this is a very good tool. It helped my military observer doing some analysis to manage those data. And here I see still big margins of improvement in the future. We started this year, but definitely we have already some positive aspect that we can use. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I'd really like to thank all of our panelists for being with us today. We really appreciate your time, the reports. I want to remind you that the reports are available. Both the DPO report and the IPI report are available in hard copy here at IPI. You can also access IPI's report on the IPI website. I want to encourage you to stay tuned. This is the first of several publications and events that IPI has on A4P+ coming out this year. So please stay tuned. And we want to thank again the Kingdom of the Netherlands for their very generous support of this program. Thank you to DPO for being such wonderful collaborators with us in the broader UN system, and to all of our member state and other partners for being with us today. Thanks to everyone, and have a great day.